My name is Abigail, a 28-year-old woman, found herself entangled in a challenging situation following her marriage to Benjamin. After the wedding, she left her full-time job to embrace a part-time role, dedicating herself to managing household duties, while Benjamin often came home late from work commitments. This balancing act of responsibilities and part-time work was a testament to her dedication to their life together. Tragedy struck when Benjamin received a distressing call about his father's sudden passing. The loss devastated the family, and in the midst of grief, Benjamin suggested that they invite his mother to live with them to prevent her from sinking into depression. Abigail, wanting to support her husband and his mother during this difficult time, agreed to this arrangement. However, this decision led to unforeseen turmoil in Abigail's life. From the very first day, her mother-in-law imposed unrealistic expectations on her, criticizing her for not waking up early enough and for not immediately attending to household chores. She was relentless, often belittling Abigail for not having children 3 years into the marriage, and even accusing her of being infertile, branding her as a worthless daughter-in-law. The harassment was constant. Every evening, Abigail was expected to juggle dinner preparations, bathroom cleaning, and laundry, all to meet the demands of her mother-in-law, who acted more like a tyrant than a family member. Despite the heavy load of household and part-time work, her mother-in-law's continuous complaints and insults made her situation unbearable. Reaching her limit, Abigail sought solace by returning to her parents' house, unable to endure the relentless torment. It was then she learned from Benjamin that his mother had suffered a severe accident, resulting in paralysis from the waist down. Benjamin, placing blame on Abigail for the accident, demanded she take full responsibility for his mother's care. This was the last straw for Abigail, who had endured so much already. She could not accept this demand after everything she had been through and proposed a divorce, seeking to free herself from an environment filled with harassment and unrealistic expectations. Abigail's story is not just about the challenges of adjusting to marriage and family dynamics, but also about standing up for oneself in the face of undue hardship and emotional abuse. It highlights the importance of setting boundaries and the need for mutual respect and understanding in all relationships. Abigail found herself overwhelmed by the expectations placed upon her, especially since she was also committed to her part-time job. She longed for some assistance from her mother-in-law with the household chores, feeling it was unfair to shoulder everything alone given her work commitments. However, her plea for help was dismissed by her husband, who seemed to believe that managing the house was solely her responsibility, just as his mother had done in the past. The situation worsened as her mother-in-law's behavior became increasingly intrusive and demeaning. One morning, Abigail discovered her mother-in-law rummaging through her personal belongings, critiquing her choice of underwear as plain and suggesting it made her unattractive to Benjamin. Despite Abigail's protests for privacy, her mother-in-law dismissed her concerns, even threatening to gossip about it with neighbors, insinuating that their lack of grandchildren was due to Abigail's unappealing. Feeling isolated, with no support from Benjamin and distant from any friends, Abigail found herself alone in a hostile environment. The neighbors, influenced by her mother-in-law's words, turned against her, leaving her without allies. Initially, Abigail had wondered if her mother-in-law's harsh attitude stemmed from a strict upbringing concerning household duties, but it became clear that her actions were driven by a desire to torment Abigail for amusement. Her attempts to find solace in Benjamin and discuss the issue were met with indifference and accusations. Benjamin, who once showed kindness, now seemed indifferent to Abigail's distress, urging her to focus on her chores instead of addressing the humiliation she faced from his mother and the community. The breaking point came when, after a particularly challenging day, her mother-in-law returned from a luncheon fuming over the conversation about grandchildren. She directly blamed Abigail for their lack of descendants, demanding she focus on conceiving, disregarding the emotional and physical toll her behavior and the overall situation were taking on Abigail. Abigail's story paints a vivid picture of her struggle with a lack of support and understanding from her husband and the unjust treatment from her mother-in-law. Caught in a web of expectations, criticism, and isolation, she grapples with her desire for respect, privacy, and a bit of empathy from the family she hoped to call her own. Being married later in life, Abigail wasn't immediately concerned about not being pregnant. She understood that, at her age, it might take some time, and she was okay with that. However, her mother-in-law seemed to struggle with this patience, likely feeling left out from conversations her peers were having about their grandchildren. Her desire to be in the spotlight was evident, and she couldn't hide her frustration when the topic of fertility treatments came up. Abigail and her husband hadn't considered them urgently, seeing no need to rush as they hadn't been married very long. These treatments, after all, demanded significant time and financial investment, Despite Abigail's reassurances, her mother-in-law appeared agitated and unconvinced, questioning Abigail's spending habits, particularly her investment in high-quality hair care products. She couldn't understand why Abigail would prioritize her appearance over fertility treatments, implying that fulfilling the role of a daughter-in-law meant producing a grandchild. Abigail had always cherished her long, straight blonde hair, a feature that had earned her compliments since she was young. She took great care of it, using part of her earnings to buy quality shampoo and conditioner. However, her mother-in-law saw this as an extravagance, suggesting with a menacing smile that Abigail's hair was a luxury they could do without. The situation escalated shockingly when her mother-in-law, in a fit of anger, physically attacked Abigail, cutting off her cherished hair. This act of cruelty was a breaking point for Abigail. It wasn't just the loss of her hair that devastated her. It was the realization that the hostility and abuse she faced in her husband's home were unbearable. The hope that her relationship with her mother-in-law could improve had been dashed. In a state of shock and hurt, Abigail decided she could no longer endure the toxic environment. She left a message for Benjamin, informing him she needed to return to her parents' house for some time, seeking refuge and peace away from the constant torment. Benjamin attempted to contact her a few times after she left, but the damage was done. The incident with her hair was not just an act of physical aggression. It symbolized the deep lack of respect and understanding she faced daily, pushing her to seek comfort and safety with her own family. Abigail had been back at her parents' home for 5 days when she unexpectedly received a daytime call from Benjamin, her husband. His voice, loud and demanding, startled her, urging her to return home immediately. Despite his shouts, Abigail stood her ground, expressing her reluctance to return anytime soon. Benjamin then mentioned his mother's accident as a reason for her to come back, which prompted Abigail to rush to the hospital, concerned despite their strained relationship. Upon arrival, she found her mother-in-law in a critical condition, hooked up to a respirator. Benjamin, overwhelmed by emotion, unjustly blamed Abigail for the accident, claiming it occurred because she had left and his mother went out to shop, suggesting that had Abigail been performing her household duties, the accident wouldn't have happened. This twisted blame game made little sense to Abigail, but she was too shocked by the severity of her mother-in-law's condition to argue back. The doctor's grim prognosis revealed severe spinal damage, with a high likelihood of permanent paralysis from the waist down. This devastating news shattered any hope of an easy recovery, leaving Benjamin and Abigail to face the harsh reality of the situation. In the midst of this crisis, Benjamin's accusations against Abigail intensified, blaming her entirely for his mother's condition and demanding she take full responsibility for her care. Threatening divorce, he insinuated that Abigail, being financially dependent due to her part-time job, had no other option but to comply. However, Abigail, faced with her husband's ultimatum and his mother's disdainful smirk, chose her dignity over the daunting prospect of returning to a life of mistreatment. Declaring her willingness to face financial hardship over enduring further abuse, she firmly stated her preference for poverty over a life with Benjamin. To Benjamin's shock, Abigail revealed she had brought divorce papers prepared for this very moment. Despite Benjamin's angry protests and attempts to belittle her, Abigail remained resolute. His signature on the papers marked the end of their tumultuous marriage. With the divorce papers signed, Abigail wasted no time in heading to the courthouse to finalize her freedom. Benjamin's bitter words faded into the background as she took her first steps towards a new beginning, prioritizing her well-being and dignity over a toxic and abusive relationship. Feeling a mix of nerves and resolve, I knew deep down that there was no future for me with Benjamin. His indifference towards the abrupt change in my hair, something he knew I deeply cherished, spoke volumes. It seemed as if my feelings and the efforts I put into maintaining my appearance, which was a significant part of my identity, meant little to him. This realization cemented my decision. I couldn't envision a life with someone who saw me merely as a cohabitant rather than a partner. Upon leaving Benjamin, my parents opened their home to me with open arms, offering both emotional and financial support to ease my transition. My father, now retired, and my mother made it clear they would assist me within their means, but I understood I couldn't solely depend on them. Motivated to stand on my own feet, I leveraged my qualifications as a certified public accountant and secured a position at a small local firm. The salary was modest, but it afforded me a level of independence and a fresh start. During this period of adjustment and newfound independence, Benjamin appeared at my childhood home, his voice filled with desperation, pleading for me to return. Despite his pleas, my heart had moved on, hardened by the realization of our fundamentally different values and expectations. Benjamin's tales of hardship following his mother's return from the hospital, her consequent behavior, and the challenges he faced did little to sway my resolve. His suggestion that I resume my role as caregiver and homemaker in exchange for financial support was met with incredulity. Did he truly believe that reverting to a life of servitude was an appealing proposition? Benjamin's assumption that I was struggling financially and his offer to support me as before underscored his misunderstanding of my situation and my desires for independence and dignity. His inability to recognize my growth and newfound self-reliance was telling. Despite his insistence, I made it clear that my current life, with its challenges and achievements, was fulfilling in ways that our marriage never was. The prospect of returning to a role of caretaker for someone who had shown me nothing but contempt was unthinkable. In an effort to quell his persistent appeals and avoid neighborhood gossip, I agreed to visit my former in-laws' home, albeit with heavy reluctance. My concession was not a sign of wavering resolve, but a means to bring closure to this chapter of my life, affirming my decision to move forward on my own terms. The reunion with Benjamin was unexpectedly swift. He seemed to believe that a simple gesture of reconnection could make all past grievances vanish. Enthusiastically, he took my hand and escorted me to his vehicle, marking my first visit in a long time to the house that once felt like a prison. The moment Benjamin announced our arrival, the unmistakable voice of my former mother-in-law filled the air with tension, a stark reminder of why I had vowed never to return. Stepping into the chaos of the living room was a shocking sight. The space was cluttered with the remnants of neglect. Grocery bags littered the floor, alongside empty containers, discarded plastic bottles, and used adult diapers, painting a vivid picture of disarray and disregard for basic hygiene. The scene was a direct challenge to any semblance of order or cleanliness, making her demand for immediate assistance all the more jarring, especially in the absence of any caregiver, a role she deemed unnecessary due to her dissatisfaction and harsh judgment of their competence. Confronted with her in a wheelchair, more irritable and demanding than ever, it was clear that her difficult nature had led to her rejection from care facilities and the rapid turnover of caregivers. Her frustration peaked upon seeing me as she hurled a water bottle in my direction, blaming me for her circumstances with vitriol. Her attempt to strike me only resulted in her own fall, a physical manifestation of her helplessness and rage. Despite her attempts to intimidate, I stood my ground, reminding her firmly that I was no longer bound to her as a daughter-in-law. Benjamin's plea for help, juxtaposed with his acknowledgement of his failures and mistreatment towards me, was a bitter pill. His apology, although sincere, came far too late to mend the deep-seated issues that had driven us apart. His offer to compensate me for household duties, in a desperate bid to manage his overwhelming responsibilities, failed to tempt me. I had moved beyond the life of servitude I once endured, having secured employment and a sense of independence that no amount of money could replace. The interaction laid bare the stark reality of our changed circumstances. Benjamin's heartfelt apology, albeit a significant gesture, could not erase the years of neglect and siding with his mother over me. His mother's inability to grasp the severity of her situation, coupled with her persistent arrogance and unwillingness to acknowledge her own faults, only solidified my resolve. Her expectation for sympathy, despite her continued hostility and blame, was a clear indication of her refusal to accept responsibility for her actions. As Benjamin attempted to mediate, urging his mother to apologize, it became evident that the cycle of blame and denial would persist, with her insisting on her innocence. This encounter reaffirmed my decision to leave, a choice made not out of spite, but a desire for self-preservation and dignity. The path forward was one of independence, far removed from the toxic dynamics of my past with Benjamin and his mother. Reflecting on the past, I recall the disdainful words of my former mother-in-law, who criticized my domestic skills despite her own inability to manage without assistance. She often suggested that I should take over the household chores, using her physical limitations as an excuse. Yet, I remember her telling me not to use work as an excuse, a statement that now seemed ironic given her own circumstances. Her complaints about needing help and believing it was her son's duty to care for her only highlighted her dependency and unwillingness to adapt to her situation. Ignoring her and Benjamin's pleas, I made the decision to leave a toxic environment that demanded too much and offered too little in return. Their struggles in my absence only confirmed the unsustainable nature of their expectations. Benjamin, overwhelmed by the dual burdens of caregiving and work, eventually lost his job due to his declining performance. His attempts to find new employment were hindered by his evident exhaustion, leading him to settle for a part-time cleaning position. Meanwhile, his mother's condition worsened, and her abusive behavior extended to the hospital staff, making her an unwelcome presence wherever she went. Her potential discharge from the hospital was of no concern to me, a chapter of my life I had firmly closed behind me. This chapter came to me through a former coworker, and as I listened, I was already building a new life for myself. With a stable job and living independently, I embraced my newfound freedom and even met someone special at work. His first compliment about my hair, which had grown long and healthy past my shoulders after I had cut it short post-divorce, marked the beginning of a beautiful relationship. Unlike Benjamin, my new partner shares household responsibilities and excels in the kitchen, showcasing a partnership based on mutual respect and support. Looking back, I regret not ending my previous marriage sooner. Financial insecurities initially held me back, but stepping into independence was the best decision for my well-being. Freed from domestic burdens and the constant criticism of my former mother-in-law, I found new energy for my career. I even started a side business, enhancing my financial stability. The contrast between my past and present life underscores the importance of self-care and prioritizing my happiness, a lesson I will carry forward.